There was some of this, and even some of this, not to mention this guy. So what was it like to sail aboard the oldest Carnival ship for just $14 per day? I'll tell you all about the good and the bad, including some things I won't ever forget right now. This is the Carnival Ecstasy. This ship is the absolute oldest vessel in Carnival's fleet, having entered service more than 30 years ago. In fact, just a few weeks from now, and maybe even by the time that you are watching this, Ecstasy will be gone from the Carnival fleet forever. But before that happened, I was able to nab the absolute cheapest cruise I've ever been on when I paid $70 in cruise fare to sail on a 5-day cruise from Mobile, Alabama to Mexico. That comes out to just $14 per day. Now, in full disclosure, I sailed solo, so I had to pay a double occupancy charge and then port fees and taxes. So the total cruise bill to get on the ship ran $232, or still under $50 per day. That's way cheaper than you can even fly to Mexico, not even including things like room and meals and entertainment. Of course, this was for an interior room. In fact, Ecstasy barely has any balcony cabins at all. So, was it a good idea or a disaster? I'm gonna be honest, when I booked this trip, I was a little scared. After all, Ecstasy, it first started sailing in 1991, or more than 30 years ago. It first sailed more than 3 years before Friends premiered, and Beanie Babies, the quintessential 90s fad, hadn't even been invented yet. We are talking a long time ago. Let's just say this trip was definitely not what I expected, and there were definitely eye-opening moments that I'll tell you about. To start my trip, I flew into Mobile, Alabama. Arriving, it was obvious that this ain't Miami. The airport, it seemed to double in size when our tiny jet arrived. And for my ride to the port, there was literally one person waiting at arrivals holding up a sign for the ship. One place where Mobile does deserve a lot of credit. I was blown away by how friendly all the staff seemed to be at the port. Every person seemed approachable, patient, and friendly as hundreds of people made their way to get on board. It's something that definitely stuck out to me compared to other ports. So getting to the port and through security, it was time to finally board Ecstasy. Now, I've been on a lot of cruise ships across all sorts of cruise lines. I will say that immediately stepping aboard, I realized I have never been on a cruise ship like this one. So my expectation, with such an old ship and the fact that it was about to leave the fleet, I figured it would be looking shabby and run down, but that actually wasn't the case. Now, do not get me wrong, it does show plenty of age. The wooden decks, they need a lot of work. There was wear and tear in the cabin, but I'm actually amazed that it could still look as good as it does after 3 decades at sea, and when it's about to leave the fleet. I think it does help that the ship looked like it had recently gotten a fresh coat of paint. But what really caught my attention is that Ecstasy felt like a time capsule, and I was all for it. There was a definite 1990s style to the ship, with lots of bright colors, neon, and lots of mirrored surfaces. And in general, things felt more cramped than on a newer ship. But having this ship be in such a dated 90s style, it made it unique. Instead of having a bunch of trendy muted browns and grays like you see with contemporary style, Ecstasy stood out. So do I want every ship to look like this? Absolutely not. But it was fun to experience before it goes away. But one other thing I noticed is that, as you would expect, there were not near the amount of amenities and activities as a modern ship. For instance, there's only one specialty restaurant on the ship. It was a quick serve sushi spot. Pool deck activities included the pool, a small water park, and a mini golf course. That's it. Indoors, you have the theater and the casino, and then a few lounges. In other words, while there are things to do, it was nowhere near what you'd expect from a newer ship. There were, however, lots of little surprises. Take the first night as the ship sailed out of Mobile headed toward Mexico. So when you're at sea, you'd think that you'd be able to see the stars. But the light pollution from the ship, it normally makes this impossible. But on Carnival Ecstasy, there was a spot that's forward on the ship on the highest deck that had almost no light at all. So the result, a spot where the ship got dark and the sky lit up. I could clearly see the glow of the Milky Way across the night sky, thousands of stars, and even spotted some satellites crossing overhead. That view alone definitely gave me my $14 worth for the day. In fact, the entire trip was filled with little surprises like that. Take the weather. Our days at sea were largely gorgeous. And while there isn't much to do on the ship compared to newer ones, it is hard not to have a good time just hanging out poolside getting some sun. And even when it did get a bit stormy, the seas were never rough, and most of the time, it ended up with some gorgeous rainbows. In fact, hitting Cozumel after a day at sea, the morning started off stormy where I saw this incredible rainbow. But that weather, combined with some ridiculous tourist prices, also led to what ended up being an awesome adventure in the first port of call. Needless to say, after 2 days on the ship, I was ready to stretch my legs a bit. My plan was to spend the day in Cozumel at Playa Palancar. It's a beach area where admission is free, but you're expected to buy the food and drinks that are offered. If you've never visited Cozumel, then one tip is that the taxi prices, they are set and listed in the ports. So you can see exactly how much you can expect to pay before you get into the cab. The only issue is that taxi prices are pretty high. For example, the ride down the coast to Playa Palancar, which is less than 10 miles away, the cost was listed at $25. Considering I cruise solo, that would mean $50 round trip just for me to get back and forth before any sort of tip. That's nearly what I paid in cruise fare. So at the last minute, I decided to just start walking in the town to explore on my own. In this case, I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but really I was just exploring and trying to get out of that port area, which was just loud and hectic with 7 different cruise ships in port that day. However, after about 15 minutes, I saw a sign for Playa Stingray with a set of simple stairs that led from the sidewalk down to the beach. Now, you should know that the shore on this side of Cozumel, it's very rocky. The sandy beaches, they are farther down south and on the other side of the island. But the water is still crystal clear and warm. And while Playa Stingray wasn't exactly postcard worthy, I was also completely alone here. Just half a mile down the coast were massive cruise ships with thousands of people, loud taxis and scooters, and all of that. And the other direction sat the main city with even more cruise ships. In this spot, however, I had found a little hidden away beach that was literally all to myself. Worth $14 a day? You better believe it. And then I met Michael. Who is Michael? Well, I was looking for something for my very unique mom. She absolutely loves anything that is cheap and gaudy, and specifically asked me to bring her something to fit that bill. So no, your eyes are not deceiving you. This is a Mexican skeleton Michael Jackson, complete with a velvet suit and one sparkly glove. Can you believe that this was even marked down 80% from its original cost? Michael in tow, it was back aboard and time for the ship to head to the next port, Progreso, and that's where I had an excursion planned that cost even more than the cruise, but was one of the most amazing things that I've ever done in my life. This excursion was officially called the Underground Caverns and Shaman Ceremony, cost $85 per person. The outing takes you from Progreso out to swim in 2 cenotes. So cenotes are essentially freshwater sinkholes that dot the Yucatan. They have crystal clear water that's often connected to other cenotes via underground caves. So on that day in port, a group of about 20 people on the excursion started by piling onto a chartered bus. First, the bus headed toward Merida, which is a major city in the Yucatan. It's large and modern, complete with many American stores and restaurants that you already know. We're talking things like Office Depot and Walmart and Church's Chicken. There are even large car dealerships, including those selling Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, and Kia. But then we started to go off the beaten path. We passed through small towns that were tiny, and despite being only 30 or 45 minutes away from Merida, they were a world away. We're talking small dogs roaming the streets, churches that dominate the town squares, small family bodegas on the corners selling snacks and drinks. There are even small meat markets hanging fresh cuts in the open air. It's definitely not Merida with the Mercedes-Benz dealerships. So I hadn't expected it, but the ride was an interesting glimpse into the real Mexico outside of the tourist zones, and even showed the big differences between the urban cities and the rural towns that are just minutes from each other. Finally at the cenotes, we grabbed life jackets and snorkel gear and loaded up 8 people to a cart, and then each one was hooked up to a horse. The driver then gave the order and the horse started trotting down the track. I have to say it's the first time I've ever ridden on a horse-drawn rail car. From there, it was time to get our first look at the cenote. This particular spot has a hole in the earth that's about 15 or 20 feet across. You descend down the wooden stairs, and the cave is essentially shaped like a bell. And at the base, about 4 stories down, is the most beautiful clear water you've ever seen. It's really hard to describe what it's like to swim in a cenote like this. The water is beautiful, the area is enclosed, and the only light is coming through the hole in the roof of the cave. It's something 100% unique and really makes you appreciate the things that Mother Nature can do. So we all swam for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then it was on to the second cenote. In this case, a massive staircase was carved out of the rock, leading down to the edge of the water. A short walk through a carved out tunnel opened up to the cavern. It's hard to convey just how special an experience swimming in these spots actually was. Sure, there were some parts of this excursion that were definitely touristy, but it's something that I'm not going to forget anytime soon. Following the trips to the cenotes, that evening the ship charted a course back north, spending the last day of the cruise at sea as we motored back to Mobile for one of the last times ever with Carnival Ecstasy. As you can tell, there was a lot of amazing things about this cruise, but don't think that everything was always perfect. First, the more time that I spent on the ship, the more cramped it seemed. The food, it was what you expect on Carnival, including those favorites like Guy's Burger Joint and Blue Iguana Cantina, but there weren't a ton of options to eat. By the end of 5 days, I was at my limit of deli sandwiches and burgers and the like. And frankly, I'm not a fan of any buffet, so that limited my options even more. That last day at sea was also pretty long, as apart from the shows that were put on in the theater, which were great, the casino and the pool, there wasn't that much to do after being aboard 4 days previously. As well, over time, the wear and the tear around the ship seemed to catch my eye more and more. I still think that Ecstasy seemed in good shape for 3 decades on the open ocean, but yeah, there were some spots that were looking a bit rough. And then there was the episode with the weird smell and the work in the cabin next door. So around day 3, I noticed that my room, it had a strange smell when I walked in. It smelled faintly like mildew, like when you leave wet clothes in the washing machine too long. It wasn't bad, and it seemed to fade after a minute as you got used to it. No big deal, it's an old ship. And then I noticed that the door decorations of the cabin next to mine were now moved about 10 cabins down. That's interesting. Well, on the last day at sea, I see that the door to that now vacant cabin is open as I pass by after breakfast. Maintenance is in there, the ceiling is pulled down, the bed is moved. I head back into my room to relax for a bit, and then I hear this. And that's followed by the sounds of hammering and welding. After a few minutes of hearing them work, I just went to the pool instead of relaxing in the cabin. But when I came back, the wet laundry smell was now gone, so my thinking is that there was some sort of leak in the ceiling next door. Again, it's an old ship. So what's the bottom line on sailing for just $70 for 5 days on Carnival's oldest ship? First, let's start with that ship. It's old, it's small, it's showing some age, and it's not on par with the sort of cruise ships built today. But there is some charm there too. I mentioned that it felt like a time capsule. The decor, it was very 1990s, and personally, I dug it. If it were my first cruise, I'm not sure what I'd think. But having sailed a lot of different ships, Ecstasy was a fun change of pace that's different from anything else on the ocean. That said, I think that 3 or 4 days on the ship is plenty. 5 days got to be a bit long. A week-long cruise, I couldn't do it. There's simply not enough to do and eat on board. But I also came back to that price tag and the things that I got to do on the cruise. For way less than the cost of a plane ticket alone, I was able to visit the Yucatan. I swam on a private beach in Cozumel. I got to see and swim in cenotes. While the ship is at sea, I was able to view the Milky Way, rainbows, days of sunshine, and beautiful dark storm clouds rolling across the horizon. I met some great folks, and I ate one hell of a piece of chocolate cake from the coffee shop. In other words, I came in expecting one thing, but got an experience completely different from that. Carnival Ecstasy. It may not be my first choice for a ship to sail, and it definitely would not be for everyone. But I am glad that I got the chance to experience it all while she is still at sea. I don't think I'd do it again, but I still had a ton of fun. Thanks for watching. Say thanks, Michael. Thank you. Would you sail on Carnival Ecstasy? What do you think about it leaving the fleet? I want to know your thoughts. Put your comments below. As well, I hope that you'll like and subscribe for more tips and info about everything cruising. And until next time, happy sailing.